So this is the book that we are referring to right now, The Metropolitan Affair. Um, Dr. Lauren Westlake she has a PhD in Egyptology, and the year is 1925 when the story opens. And back then, was probably, well, she is inspired by a woman who was the first woman in America to have a PhD in Egyptology. The first woman, like she lived and was an assistant curator of Egyptian art for the Metropolitan Museum of Art, but in like the 1908 timeframe. So I was inspired by this woman pioneering the field of Egyptology in America, but I moved it up to the 1925 timeframe so that we could take advantage of um, Egyptomania and King Tut fever, because in the 1925 timeframe, they had just gone into recently King Tut's tomb for the first time, and everybody was super excited about this. So it just made the interest in all things Egyptian more accessible to pop culture and not just in the realm of these academics. So Dr. Lauren Westlake, she lives with two roommates in Manhattan, right on Central Park. She lives in the Beresford, which is still there today. Now it was, rebuilt since it was first built, so it's not quite the same building that it was. Um, but in the story, her father enters the picture and invites her to go on this expedition to Egypt, which she has never done before. Like she's done all the book work, but she's never been. And she had been kind of estranged from her father. And now he gives her this opportunity, but he first wants her to do some things for him. And so throughout the story, you're kind of wondering, is this really going to work out? Like, are we going to have reconciliation or are we not? And the other part of it, the story, is that she gets drawn into some police investigations because the more popular Egyptian art is, the more art fraud there is, the more forgeries. And this is like big business. And so, because she knows this all so well, she is the expert consultant to be able to identify forgeries. And this was at a time when you didn't have like chemical testing and x-ray technology and all of the things that we would today use to figure out if something was a fake. So that was an interesting part of the research for me. Like, how could you know? How could you tell? But we figured it out. So all of those things work together in this story. I went to Manhattan, I went to the Met, and it's changed since 1925, but there's enough there. There's enough there to get the essence of it. And sometimes I like to go to these places on location because you might find a little book in a gift shop that's not online that you would never find in your internet research. But that really specific book, for example, when I went to the Met in the gift shop, I found this huge book. It's The Book of the Dead, which plays a key role in the novel. And I never would have gotten that if I hadn't gone there. So let's see, there's the mafia plays a role in the story too. I didn't mention that before. So I think going there was fun, but a lot of my research was actually books, and yeah, it was a lot of book research about what, and the Met website, because on the Met website, they can tell you what Egyptian artifacts they had in their museum in 1925, where it came from. So all of the art that we discuss, I was careful to make sure it was actually at the Met. And there's the provenance is right there on the Met website, which is amazing. But also looking into how do you catch an art forger, and like not just how do you determine that something is fake, but then how do you go about catching like all the people that are involved in the creation of it and the fencing of it and all of that. So It was a lot of research in a lot of different fields. Also had to research prohibition, and the book Dry Manhattan was really helpful to me. That was kind of a joke because Manhattan was supposed to be dry, but it was not during prohibition, not at all. And Elsa is Lauren's cousin. And a lot of the stories in a series, I think I have an idea for them when I start writing the first book, but they develop as I go along. So, what I knew about Elsa from the beginning was that she was a polio survivor. What I didn't know when I started writing book one was that in book two, a big part of her story is that her symptoms come back, which happens in a small percentage of polio survivors. And so she's dealing with diminished capacity with her lungs and her leg. And how do you deal with that as a young person? Like, now you're regressing. But her professional story, um, so the series, I'm just going to back up and give a little context. The series is named On Central Park because all three of the protagonists of the three different novels work in institutions that are set along Central Park. So we've got the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Elsa works at the American Museum of Natural History. And then the third book we'll talk about later, Ivy works at the New York Historical Society. So Elsa is an ornithologist, and she's fascinated by birds partly because they fly and she can't, with her legs being the way they are from polio, as a child, bedridden, she would look out the window and bird watch and also admire their flight. And so that's the beginning of her fascination with birds. In the beginning of that story, her boss tasks her with going to an estate because a woman has died and bequeathed to the museum her entire collection of stuffed taxidermied birds. But they don't want to bring all these into the museum if they aren't good quality or if they already have some of these. So that's how I got her to this Gothic estate north of Manhattan. But once she gets there, she finds that there is a missing um, illuminated book about birds that was a big part of the woman's will, bequeathed to the gardener's daughter. The gardener's daughter is 12 years old. We would identify her today as being on the autism spectrum. But in 1926, they didn't call it that. They didn't know what this was. They just thought it was, the mental illness. If anything, they would call it schizophrenia. So at the same time, she's doing this work, this cataloging work, which isn't all that interesting. She's also jumping in to kind of a treasure hunt, so that because there's more than one person who wants this amazing medieval book. They've got family members coming in who also want it because they were cut out of the will, and this is a thing of great value. So Elsa's befriending this 12-year-old Danielle, and they connect, and her mother, of course, because this was also the time of the height of the eugenics movement in America. And the eugenics movement was adopted by the Nazis as saying, there should be perfect specimens of people. Well, we had that movement here in America. And in the 1920s, there was a lot of talk about pedigrees, and, like how they even had in fairs, like better baby competitions where, you have livestock competitions and you can give a blue ribbon to cattle or pigs. They did that for babies. Like, they had these little tests and they're trying to say, like, this is the most valuable blue ribbon baby. And there was forced sterilization of people if they didn't want them to create any more that would have mental illness or um, crime, they would say, or alcoholism. So that was a very interesting backdrop to have Elsa, who's struggling with the effects of polio, because now she is definitely not the gold standard according to the eugenics movement. And we've got this child she's on the autism spectrum. And how do you value human life? And then, of course, there's the treasure hunt thrown into that. The Manhattan Confessions, but Ivy is the third roommate of all of these three, and she is a librarian at the New York Historical Society. And when we open the story, one of her jobs, is to collect oral histories or written histories from the old timers who remember what it was like to live in New York City in Manhattan during the Gilded Age. And there's a woman who said, I have a story to share, but it's got to be anonymous. So Ivy writes it down and finds out that this woman, she's like the grand dame of society. People really look up to her. Well, she has been operating under a fake identity ever since she was like 18. She's actually an Irish immigrant and had gotten involved with a gang and then blackmailed. She has a checkered past, let's say. And so now Ivy is the keeper of her identity. And then these two men come out of the woodwork and say, after they read the story in the bulletin of the New York Historical Society, and they say, I'm related to her, or I need to talk to her. And Ivy's trying to like keep them away. But the more they pester Ivy, the more she wonders, okay, is there even more to Adeline's story than she told me? Because one of the men accuses her of being involved in a crime back during the gangster days. And the and he says that she has information that it's like a life or death situation even now. And if she holds on to it, he says the stakes are very high. So Ivy has to decide what to do with this. The other part of Ivy's story is that her Italian cousin has immigrated to the United States, but she's being detained at Ellis Island for lack of proper documentation. And so Ivy goes to an immigration services bureau to try to straighten this out, doesn't realize that she has put herself into a dangerous world. This was 1926. There were immigration quota laws keeping people out, especially Italians. And so immigration smuggling was actually pretty big business. Just like prohibition was big business, sometimes they would go together. Like they would, if you're smuggling alcohol along these routes, you could smuggle immigrants along these routes. And there were all kinds of ways for shady characters to make money off of immigrants or their loved ones, immigrants trying to get into America. So Ivy is kind of finds herself in a tangle of both of these situations. There's the immigration situation with where the services that she has hired are not all that they seem to be. And then there's also Adeline's true identity and what revealing that could mean for her and for the people that these men say their lives are at stake. So it's another mysterious historical fiction. I didn't outline as much with book 2, but with book 1 and 3, I did more outlining just because whenever you are plotting a mystery, it's hard for me to keep track of which character knows what and at what point in time, and what are the misunderstandings, and when do they get cleared up, and by whom. So there are spreadsheets involved for sure.
Is this the end of the trilogy or is there more coming?
Yes, this is the end. Mm-hmm.
So what's coming up next in respect to is it a new series, a standalone?
I don't know yet. I am currently plumbing the depths of a bunch of, if you could look beyond me and behind me, I've got stacks of books that I've checked out from the library, and I'm currently researching the 1600s America, like New England, but I'm also kind of researching medieval Europe. And but I've got some ideas of like how to kind of work some of these together. So I'm in the very, very early stages of whatever is next, but it's fun. I really enjoy the research stage.